The great hall smelled of candle wax and expensive perfume. Elara moved along the far wall with a tray of goblets, keeping her eyes forward and her steps quiet. 3 years of working in the Ardyn Palace had taught her 2 things above all else: be useful and be invisible. Tonight, with every noblewoman in the 5 packs pressed into silk gowns and nervous smiles, invisibility was the easier of the 2. The mating ceremony had been the talk of the palace for months. King Caelum Ardyn would finally choose a mate. Court advisors had drawn up lists. Lady Seraphine, the eldest daughter of the Voss nobility, no relation to Elara, whose surname was borrowed from the village she had come from, was considered the obvious choice. She stood near the center of the room now, composed and luminous, her dark hair pinned with silver. Elara refilled a goblet without being asked and moved on. She had heard the older maids describe the alpha aura in hushed, awed voices. They said it was like standing too close to a fire, warmth before heat, a pull before a push. They said that when an alpha king entered a room, a woman's body simply knew before her mind caught up. Mira, Weira, Elara's closest friend among the palace staff, had fanned herself describing it. The doors at the far end of the hall opened. The room changed. Elara felt it happen even from the edges. A collective stillness. A kind of breath held by 30 women at once. She glanced up. King Caelum walked in, flanked by 2 advisors, and the effect on the noblewomen was immediate and almost funny. Straightened spines, parted lips, cheeks going pink in sequence like candles being lit down a row. Elara looked at him the way she looked at everything in the palace that was not her immediate responsibility. He was tall. He carried himself like a man who had never once wondered whether he belonged somewhere. His expression was measured, courteous, and entirely closed. She felt nothing unusual. She checked, quietly and privately, the way a person presses on a bruise to confirm it is still there. No pull, no warmth, a mild professional alertness, as though she had noted that an important guest had arrived, and she should make sure his goblet was full. That was all. She found this mildly puzzling for approximately 4 seconds, and then a tray of empty glasses needed collecting, and she stopped thinking about it. The ceremony moved through its formal stages. The king greeted each woman, exchanged a few words, moved on. Elara worked the room in the opposite direction, efficient and unobtrusive. She was rounding the side of the raised dais when a goblet near the edge tilted. Someone's sleeve had caught the stem, and she stepped in without thinking, catching it just before it hit the marble floor. She straightened. The king was 3 feet away. He was looking at her. Not the way men looked at maids, which was usually not at all. He was looking at her the way a person looks at something unexpected, with brief, genuine attention. She had not bowed. She had been too focused on the goblet to remember to bow. She corrected this now, dipping her head. "My apologies, Your Majesty." He said nothing. After a moment, he looked away. Elara returned to the side of the room and thought no more about it. 3 days after the ceremony, Elara was assigned to prepare the king's private study for a week of diplomatic correspondence. It was considered a responsible posting. The study held documents that required discretion, and head steward Bram gave it to her with a look that suggested he expected her not to disappoint him. The work was simple. She organized, dusted, refilled the inkwells, and set the morning tea service. On the 2nd day, the king arrived while she was still straightening the bookshelves. "Continue," he said, when she moved to leave. She continued. He worked standing at the tall desk near the window, which she had not expected. He read with a slight furrow between his brows that seemed habitual rather than concerned. He took his tea black and left the cup where he had set it, rather than moving it back to the tray. By the end of the week, she knew more about his private habits than she knew about most of the people she had worked alongside for years. She told herself this was simply a function of proximity. It meant nothing. On the 5th day, Lady Seraphine arrived for her formal courtship week. The palace adjusted around her presence, the way it adjusted around any powerful guest, discreetly, thoroughly, with every small comfort anticipated. Elara served at 2 dinners, and was careful to be exactly as invisible as the occasion required. Seraphine was not unkind in the manner of women who enjoyed unkindness. She was precise. On the 3rd morning of her visit, she found Elara alone in the corridor outside the study and stopped. "You work in there," she said. It was not a question. I do, my lady. Seraphine considered her for a moment. She had dark, intelligent eyes, and she used them the way experienced people use careful tools. I've asked Steward Bram to rotate your assignment. Elara kept her expression neutral. Of course, my lady. I don't mean it as an insult. Seraphine's voice was even. I mean it as a fact. Whatever the room looks like from where you're standing, I'm asking you to understand how it looks from where I'm standing. I understand, my lady. Seraphine studied her for one more moment, then nodded and moved on. Elara was transferred to laundry rotation by the afternoon. Mira found her that evening sorting linens and sat down uninvited on the basket beside her. You should say something. To whom? To Bram. To anyone. Mira folded a corner of a sheet with more aggression than the sheet deserved. She had you moved because she's threatened. She had me moved because she's practical, Elara said. She's right. From where she's standing, it's a sensible thing to do. Mira stared at her. You're defending her. I'm being accurate. Elara smoothed a crease from the linen in her hands. I'm a maid, Mira. I work here. I'm not in a story where that changes. She almost believed it. On the third morning of laundry rotation, Steward Bram came to find her, with an expression that suggested he had been placed in an uncomfortable position and wished to share the experience. You're to return to the study, he said. Elara looked up from the linens. Did my lady Seraphine? The king reversed the assignment. Bram said it with the tone of someone reporting weather he did not approve of. This morning, personally. Elara said nothing. She folded the sheet she was holding, set it on the pile, and went to collect her things. The study was exactly as she had left it. The king was already at his desk when she arrived. She set about her work. Neither of them mentioned what had happened, but when she brought his midday tea, black, set at the left corner of the desk, where he could reach it without looking up, he said, "Thank you, Elara," and used her name, which he had never done before. She kept her face entirely calm and went back to the shelves. That evening, the diplomatic correspondence had thinned and the palace was quiet. Elara stayed late to sort a delivery of letters that had arrived out of sequence. She expected the study to be empty. It was not. Caelum was at his desk, a single lamp burning, working through a folder that was thicker than the others. He looked tired in a way that the ceremony and the courtship dinners had not shown, tired in the particular way of someone who has been holding themselves correctly for a long time. She worked quietly and tried not to notice. After a while, he said, without looking up, "What would you do with a land dispute where neither party is lying?" She paused. He was looking at the papers, not at her. He might have been speaking to himself. "Neither side will be fully satisfied," she said carefully. "So the only real question is which outcome you can defend in 10 years. He did look up then. "Not which is more fair," she continued, because she had started, and there was no elegant way to stop. Those are sometimes different things. Fair is a moment. Defensible is a direction. He was quiet for a moment. "You're right," he said. They talked for over an hour. She sat in the chair across the desk, because he gestured to it, and she had not known how to refuse without making the gesture strange. He asked questions and she answered them honestly, because dishonesty had always felt like more effort than it was worth. She asked one question of her own, whether the Northern Pact's claim had been properly documented at the original settlement, and he went still in the way that meant she had found something. When she finally left, the lamp was burning low, and neither of them had thought to refill it. She walked back to the servants' quarters in the dark, and sat on the edge of her bed for a long time without undressing, looking at the wall. Mira knocked and put her head in. She looked at Elara's face and sat down next to her without speaking. "I'm not in a story where this changes," Elara said, to remind herself. "I know," said Mira, who clearly did not believe her. The bonding declaration was set for a Thursday. The 5 noble packs sent representatives. The great hall was full again, fragrant and gleaming, every surface dressed for significance. Elara worked the event exactly as she had worked the first ceremony. Tray in hand, steps quiet, eyes forward. She had made a kind of peace with it, or something that functioned like peace, which she suspected was the closest most people got. Caelum would announce Seraphine. Seraphine would receive the announcement with precisely the right expression. The packs would be satisfied. The land dispute would be resolved, because she had helped find the documentary gap, and it had been her most useful contribution, and that was enough. She was collecting empty goblets near the side wall when the hall went quiet. Caelum stood at the dais. He had been speaking, the formal words of opening, the ceremonial phrases she had heard described secondhand, and then he stopped. The pause was long enough that people began to look at each other. His eyes moved across the room. She knew the moment they found her, because the quality of the room's attention shifted, and several heads turned to follow his gaze, and she was standing there with a tray of empty goblets and nowhere to be invisible. She looked back at him. She did not manufacture any expression. She was simply honest, because dishonesty had always felt like more effort than it was worth. He stepped down from the dais. The hall erupted in a wave of urgent, restrained whisper, the sound of an entire court trying to be scandalized quietly. Bram moved. Caelum stopped him with a look she had seen him use on difficult advisors. Seraphine, across the room, held her composure with a precision that Elara found genuinely admirable. He crossed the hall. He stopped in front of her. "What do you want?" he asked, quietly, so only she could hear it. She almost laughed. "You can't ask me that here. I can ask you anywhere. I'm asking you here." She looked at him steadily. "What I want would cost you significantly. I know. 2 of the 5 packs, at minimum, possibly the Northern Trade Agreement. I've read the same analysis you have," he said. "I know what it costs. I'm not going to make this easy for you. I would not expect you to." She stood there with her tray of empty goblets, in her plain gray uniform, in front of the entire assembled court, and thought about the land dispute with no clean answer, and the 10-year test, and what it meant to choose a direction over a moment. "Then you should know," she said, "that I have conditions." Something moved in his expression that was not quite a smile. "Tell me your conditions." "Not here," she said, "in the study, where we can think properly." The announcement was postponed. The court did not take this gracefully. 2 packs formally withdrew their cooperative pledges. The Northern Trade Agreement was delayed by 8 months. Steward Bram aged visibly over the following weeks. Seraphine left the palace on the 4th morning with her baggage perfectly packed and her head perfectly level, and Elara respected her for that more than she could say. Caelum navigated the fallout the way he navigated everything, steadily, without drama, with the patience of a man who understood that most problems were long problems, and rushing them made them longer. Elara did not move into the royal chambers. She moved, eventually, into a set of rooms near the library, on her own timeline, and she kept her gray uniform hanging on the back of the door, for reasons she could not entirely explain, except that it reminded her of what she had been, when none of this was a possibility, and she thought it was important to remember that. She took on work that suited her, organizing correspondence, sitting in on the land councils, because she had an eye for gaps in documentation, occasionally saying plainly true things in rooms full of people who were being careful. She refused the first title offered to her, and the second, and accepted a third one 8 months later, because by then she felt she had built something worth the name. On a quiet evening in the middle of all this, she was in the study with Caelum, who was at his desk, because he always worked at his desk, when she noticed his tea had gone cold. She picked it up without comment and brought him a fresh cup. He took it. He looked at her over the rim of it, with an expression she had come to know, which was not quite gratitude, and not quite amusement, but lived somewhere warm between the two. "You know," he said, "you still do that. You still leave your cup where I have to reach past your papers to retrieve it. Old habits." She said, and sat down in the chair across the desk, and picked up the letter she had been reviewing, and they went back to work. The lamp was full. The room was warm. Outside, the palace was going about its complicated, ongoing life, as palaces do. It was, Elara thought, more than enough.